So, are you tired of all the red tape that comes with trying to make change, either in your district or in your state? Well, you're in luck, because today we're going to be talking about cutting through this red tape and having your voice make a difference, and having parents step up and be more of not only advising policymakers, but parents as policymakers. So I notice we have a few new people here today. So welcome. I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a retired teacher, a parent, and author of a #1 best-selling book on Amazon, The Art of Advocacy. And I host this weekly Facebook Live show. So I'm super excited that you're here with us. Whether you're here live or watching the replay, you can always type in your comments and questions, and we will get to those either live or come back later and answer your questions. So let's have a wonderful show. We are lucky because today we have a special guest, and I'm going to bring Courtney over here. So Courtney Hansen is with us. She is currently living in Tacoma, Washington. She's a spouse of a military officer, and so she knows what it's like to have those moves. Her boys are 6 years old, and they've already moved 3 different times. So you know what it's like to learn new state rules and regs every time you have to make a move with your family. And Courtney went through the SEAT training from the COPAA, which is Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. She is a SEAT graduate and is a non-attorney advocate in the state of Washington. So welcome, Courtney. I'm so glad that we could get this time together.
Thank you for this opportunity, Charmaine. I really appreciate it. We've moved recently, and so I'm learning all over again, the leaders in my state and the policy that's going on. It's quite an uphill battle. So it's kind of like getting that first initial diagnosis, right? You're overwhelmed, and that's why I did COPAA, because honestly, I realized that if I knew the federal law and they could help me learn how to learn these state laws, it would really help with all of our moves, because we're going to continue to move. And so far, my boys have had services. I have twins, one with Down syndrome. So my son with Down syndrome has had services in Nebraska, in Ohio, now in Washington in his very young life. And so I got to see a lot of different policy in different states. There they are, those cute guys. And now they're starting kindergarten in Washington. And so I've walked into a situation where I've been able to do my homework and have gotten a good placement for both of them in a general education classroom. But it took some work, and it took some doing, and it took some looking at different states and what they do. So thank you for letting me join.
Well, yes, and so we don't forget, I also want to show people the handout that you have for them. So let me bring that back up here. And if you want a copy of Courtney's handout, all you have to do is type in the word preschool, and my bot will answer you. So let me bring this back up and change over. So, Courtney, do you want to, it's going to be small for them to read, but do you want to tell them what this is?
Yeah. So, I always talk about when you're starting your advocacy journey to always share your story and make it personal. And so this is a easy one-page. I did this on canva.com. You can do it for free. And it's a great way to kind of show your teachers up to the school board, and then your state representatives. And I've even taken something like this all the way to DC to give to my Washington, my US representatives. It gives them a glimpse into your own life. So on the left-hand side, I talk about our story and what has happened with us. I give them my contact information. And then on the right side, I propose my ideas. I talk about what issues are important, what issues that I see need to be taken care of, and how maybe they can do that. And I always feel like the more information you can give them about what they can do, the more they're going to be invested in that and helping you make that problem be solved. And another thing that I always put in there other people that support me. It's very important that you don't do these things alone, that you either have other parents involved or you have state leaders or other group leaders like the ARC or Developmental Disabilities Council behind you. So it's a great handout to give to anyone.
Yeah, so just type in the comments preschool and you'll get a message to type again the word preschool, and then you'll get the actual link to get the handout. So thanks for making that and sharing that. That's going to be really helpful. I think, one of the things that we wanted to talk about too was just to give people the context of historically how parents have been involved in the policymaking arena and creating change.
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we look at things like,
I think you're freezing.
Yeah. Behind all of those things, there was a parent. I mean, we can go all the way back to, or a self-advocate, Linda Brown, the little Black girl and her parents who took her to an all-white school and showed the disability community what was possible. And that led to 13 families in Pennsylvania suing the state and saying that their child with an intellectual disability should be educated, should get some form of education, that would benefit them more than being institutionalized, and it would help society. And of course, those parents led to congressional investigations. And that leads us all the way to ADA and people like Madeline Will, who has a son with Down syndrome and was able to kind of rise to the rank of Assistant Secretary of OSERS, but was able to use her story to affect change. And this is in the 1980s. So, it doesn't take somebody being politically savvy. It just takes them sharing their story and being willing to step out of their comfort zone and tell people what needs to happen. You're seeing it around you. You know what the issues are and the problems are. So share that with people that don't understand, that aren't a part of our community or a part of the disability community and those self-advocates.
Right. And I think, I think you made an excellent point also, as far as, today it seems like we're emphasizing the parent voice, but we also want to look at our children and think that what we are modeling is this advocacy, so right. They can have those self-advocacy skills. And, when they're young, I think it's especially important for parents to, and I should bring myself back on screen because otherwise it's like, who is this person talking? But otherwise, we need to, at a certain point, start having our children's voice, right, more involved. And I think when we look at doing local things like talking to school boards, the more we can have students that are self-advocates speak to the school board and things like that, I think that makes a huge difference.
I actually have a really, it was so amazing for me. I took my kids, my husband was out of town, so I had to take all 3 kids to a disability reception at the Capitol. And I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a little overwhelming. But when we arrived, all of my kids were shaking hands, and I could tell that it instilled this very important moment, but you don't know exactly what they're going to take from it. And right. My sons and my daughter are still very young, but my typically developing son, Hunter, when we were on the car ride home, said, "Mom, I've been thinking about this, and I really want to talk to Troy's teachers about the fact that he needs extra help." And I about died because I realized he's really thinking about these things. And even the next day he said, "I want to say something at community time. Can you help me? Like, what should I say?" So he's really taking it. And I know it's only a matter of time before Troy will do those things as well, because he does see it modeled. So.
Right. Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
It does.
I mean, and so that's pretty. So has Hunter done any kind of professional development workshop with the teachers?
Yeah, it's just, things that he says in passing. And, he really knows the teachers that have gotten the inclusion thing right, and the ones, he just has figured it out. He just knows innately. And I'm sure Troy knows too, but, honestly, has a little bit more difficulty communicating that. But it's awesome to have an advocate there for Hunter or for Troy. And even kids within his own class will say stuff and to the teacher, and he loves Mardi Gras beads at circle time. When I'm in there, they'll say, but Troy doesn't have his Mardi Gras beads. Let me go get it. So in little simple ways, in kindergarten, they're already starting to sort of advocate for things that Troy may need, extra help, or things to make it equitable for him. So
Right, cool. Well, I wanted to bring up Lisa's comment. She lives in Wisconsin, and they are having a snow day, so she was able to come on with us live. But she says, "Hi, my daughter is in high school. I work as a parapro, and I'm currently doing partners in policy making in my state."
Yes, a great way to get your foot. I've had so many friends do that. Actually, while I was doing the seat training, I was considering doing the partners in policymaking. I'd love to see it and do that for sure. It's a great program.
Yeah. So, and I did one, a similar one. It was a little bit different, but in Colorado when Dylan was 3, and it really made such a huge difference. And the influence that I had from adults, that disabled adults that came and spoke at our sessions, and hearing their voice, like Norman Kuntz and Judith Snow, and, just really influential disability activists. And that just, is a wonderful opportunity. And there's always usually sessions around parents, testifying before legislation, things like that. So maybe we can get into our second point, where we were going to talk about for parents to think locally first and what they can do there as far as policymaking or having some influence.
Yeah, I have visited DC, but sometimes that juggernaut of DC can be very overwhelming. So kind of taking it back down to your state, even your school board. There's some amazing parents. Cindy Liu, that has been a mentor to me, who has done amazing work in California with her school district and bringing other parents and creating a parent group to create inclusion. Dinah Olson up in Seattle has done it and has taught me a lot about going to my own school board and talking to them. And then reaching out to your state rep. A great way to do this is hooking up with the ARC or any other developmental disability groups in your area. Often once a year or more, they'll have group a reception locally in your city where your state reps will come to you. And that's a great time to go and comment or just see what the issues are. Maybe you're not sure yet, or you don't know who's in your area. So for me, moving to a new area, this was a great way for me to know who are the mover and shakers, who's involved, what are their issues that they're kind of trying to seek out. And so actually I went to one of these local receptions, and my state rep wasn't there, but her staff aide was there, her staffer. And I would tell people, anyone out there, get to know your state reps aides, because oftentimes they are the ones that are really shaping legislation. They're helping draw up these bills. They're the gatekeepers, really. So if you can get to know them and know their emails, know their phone numbers, and reach out to them, they'll help you set up meetings and talk to your state rep. And actually at that meeting, my state reps, I gave her my one pager, and she reached out to me. So she was the one that came to me, which has never happened before. Often I have to keep emailing and making appointments. But you never know when somebody might be interested in a topic that you have. So I went out and met my state rep for an appointment, and then have been to other receptions at the state capitol and locally. So those are things that, Cindy Liu is at the DS conference, Lisa's saying that. She's awesome, amazing advocate. And the TED Talk, yes. So it's important to think locally, even within your own city and your school district, and state policy. It can be slow, but it can affect change as well.
Well, and maybe this would be a good time to talk about what you did in Ohio before you moved out west.
Yeah.
As far as the organ donor.
Yes. So when I was in Ohio, kind of one of the first steps I had into affecting policy was an organ transplant discrimination bill that other states had been doing. I think there was 4 states that had passed it. So we already had a sample bill. It's always nice to have something that other states have done so that you can take it to your state. And I called my representative. I got a hold of their aide, who eventually put me on the phone with him. And honestly, I kind of think he did think, well, is this an issue? Or they did. I think he thought, well, who is this person that's calling me? Oftentimes, legislators have lobbyists that are talking to them all day and really are in their ear. And that's why it's important to maybe be part of groups that can help give, that you can say, you know, I'm part of the National Down Syndrome Congress. I'm part of local developmental disability groups. It gives you a little bit of weight so that when you're talking to a state representative, they can understand that you're part of a larger group, a larger disability group. And so I talked to him, and eventually I actually did reach out to a lobbyist in Ohio who was a dad of a young woman with Down syndrome who agreed with the bill. And he helped me kind of have a little bit more legitimacy, and they introduced the bill. It took a while, and this was a very bipartisan bill, but it still took a year and a few months. And it passed literally the month that we left Ohio. The bill passed. So they didn't have a signing ceremony or anything like that. But I took my son to testify. He was there with me. I reached out to other families in the area, one in particular who had faced organ transplant discrimination. And on my website, I've written about how you can introduce a bill like this, specifically on organ transplant discrimination. A lot of people don't know that it even just exists, but there are people with disabilities that are being turned away for organs because of their disability. And there was a young girl up just north of me in Ohio that had faced that. So her family testified, and that was a very powerful story to share with our state reps.
Yeah, so we can bring up your website so then we can show people some of the resources there.
Yeah.
So in this, let me see here. I have to bring it up. In the search bar, what do people type in if they want to look at?
If you're on an actual laptop, on the right-hand side underneath my description, there's a search bar. You can put in organ transplant, and that will give you a how-to. A lot of people have reached out to me, how did you do this? And so I wrote up a blog post of how I actually went about giving them a sample bill from another state, reaching out to some of my state leaders to get their support behind me, reaching out to the state disability rights group so that they would be behind the bill. And so it kind of has a step-by-step, and it has other links in there about little Ellie's story and how she shared her story, and finding those stories within your state and how important those are. So you can look on the website and find out how I did that. And then I've made later posts about issues in Washington too, but it's a great resource about how we did it. And since then, there has been one other state that's passed it. So I think we're up to now 6 states that have passed this organ transplant bill. But it was a great introduction into how policy works. I used to be an American government teacher and have a poli-sci undergrad, a degree in poli-sci. So I know how a bill becomes a law, but until you're in it, until you realize the incrementalism of government and the compromise and some of the things that you do have to kind of give up to have that bigger picture come into play, you really don't understand until you've done it, you know, how it works. I've taught this to kids before, but it was really eye-opening to see it in action.
Well, and I think, you know, some parents, that seems intimidating to be working at that level. But I think, you know, if you have somebody with Courtney's skills and expertise, and then other parents can contribute by coming and testifying, or, you know, having meetings with their state reps, things like that. So you don't, you know, I think you very much need somebody that's going to be organized and leading it. But I want to encourage other parents that there's so many ways that they can be involved too.
Right. It's true. Never do it alone. And I mean, honestly, I don't feel like I have a whole history of experience, but I knew other people that had, so I could always lean on them. And so even though I'm a young mom, I realized that I had something of value to share, that I had something of value that I could help change. And so a lot of it was, I was determined I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to have other people help me get through it. So My number one advice is to never go it alone. Ask other parents to share their stories, because one parent saying it is kind of crazy, but a group of parents saying it makes it legitimate. So
right.
There you go.
That's true. And so do you want to talk about what you're currently working on in Washington around preschool inclusion?
Sure. Yeah. So when I moved to Washington, we had left preschool in Ohio, and my twins, one typical and one with Down syndrome, had been in preschool together. And in Washington, it was 50-50. So 50% of the kids in preschool had IEPs and 50% did not. When I moved to Washington, I was shocked, really, in my region, to find that wasn't the case, that most developmental public preschools did not offer any type of placement where there were typical peers. And technically that's against federal law. And as I started looking at Washington law, it has to provide at least what the federal law is providing. It's against state law too. And so I think in my county, Pierce County, I found only 2 schools that were doing something similar to Ohio, but not even really to the same degree. I did find other families north of us that do have inclusion. So there is inclusion happening in preschool and some places in Washington. But then I started asking around. I went on social media, so that's a great place to start for anyone that is seeing an issue, and asking other parents. It's anecdotal, but it at least gives you a view into what are other families experiencing. And they all were telling me, this is an issue. We didn't even know. I talked to some preschool parents that didn't even know, like, my student was supposed to be with typical peers, and that's where they're supposed to start, which is the continuum of placement. They had no idea. And so I started kind of digging and talking to leaders in the state, the developmental councils board, and the public policy leaders there. And they said, yeah, you're right. This is an issue. You should talk to your state rep. So some of the leaders said this should be a bill. So I talked to my state rep, Representative Kilduff. She's very supportive of education and disability rights. And she was concerned, and I have been working with her. But as I started to kind of look at this issue, I started realizing, and you realize this with everything, that policy making and advocacy in general is a marathon, not a sprint. This is something my mentor, Jawanda Mast, always says. It's a marathon. And so, I realized the law says that preschool should be inclusive already. So I looked at other states, Ohio, Virginia, New Hampshire. All of these particular states have passed guidance through their Department of Ed, Special Education Office, and some had passed toolkits. And so that's when I actually started reaching out to OSPI in Washington, which is the Office of Superintendent Public Instruction. I'm learning all these new acronyms, right? So I reached out to them and found out that they were actually creating a committee on this, because they delved into the data and found that only 24% of preschoolers in Washington are in a regular setting with typical peers, which is atrocious. I mean, it's awful. And it's against the law. And so they're creating a committee. And so I asked to join. And so that's where I'm at. I don't know if anything will happen at the legislative, but that's okay. You learn this as you're doing these issues. You learn where you can affect change. And I just think, as an advocate, I would rather a parent not have to go through due process, where we know most of them are not successful, and can instead look to maybe a state guidance and a state toolkit and give this to their school board and say, listen, you're not doing this. The state is saying you should, and here's how you can do it. And in doing so, I actually learned that the state is giving money to certain school districts to pilot inclusive programs. So I just learned this all from, I emailed somebody, they said I should email somebody else. So it's a lot of investigation. And as a former journalist, I just kind of knew I couldn't just stop with one person. So I just kept going up the chain and had coffee with someone from OSPI. And that's how I got involved in this committee. So.
And that's excellent. And so many times, if parents go to their State Department website, they have different newsletters. And a lot of times it's teachers or directors of special ed that are on this list to get an update or whatever of state, rules, policy, training opportunities. But I always encourage parents to sign up for those newsletters. I think they're generally made for the educators, but you get so many good tips and find out contacts, and, just that networking, like you were describing, can be so helpful.
That is a great tip, and something I didn't actually know until I started looking into this preschool option. And Tanya May at OSPI actually asked me, "Do you want to be signed up for this newsletter?" And I thought, "Oh, there's a newsletter." I don't, parents don't know these things
Right.
until they start asking questions. So I did, and when I joined this committee, she said, "We don't have a whole lot of parents on this committee." And I thought, well, that's because the news that's going out is, like you said, Charmaine, it's going to administrators and teachers. So hopefully I can be another voice, and other parents will maybe join the committee. And you never know. It's a slow process, but I still think it's worth it. And it's like anything, change and positive change is a slow moving forward. I think we're still moving forward. It's going to take a long time.
Right. And it is, I look back, my son is 30 now. And so 27 years ago,
Wow.
When he was 3, we were looking, because I was in Partners, I think, made such an influence on me. So it was like, well, we want Dylan included not only in kindergarten, but when he goes to preschool. And the district had a preschool class. And actually my typical son the year before was a tuition student there. So it was kind of a 50-50 ratio. But for us, that still wasn't an inclusive opportunity for Dylan. And so we wanted him just to go to a typical preschool. And there were so many meetings, so many back and forth disagreements. We filed for due process over a least restrictive environment for preschool. And then luckily we were able to settle at mediation. But what we wanted was for the district to provide the costs, not that we couldn't afford it, but we wanted to make sure that for other parents, when that's an option, that they don't have to pay for it, and that there would be some kind of support. There was just an early childhood person that once a week would go and do some consulting, but I mean, it was like he didn't need a lot of support, so it just worked out fine. But, so that was 27 years ago. And then fast forward to about 5 years ago, when we were leaving Colorado, I was asked to go to an IEP meeting for a little 3-year-old that they were trying to look at other options. And I said, well, what about, one of the community preschools in town? And they're like, no, we can't do that. And I'm like, yes, you can. And it was like, we had kind of blazed this trail, we thought, when Dylan was young, but that just grows over so fast. And, it just takes that persistence.
Yeah. If you're not stepping up for your own child, but also for other children, that's the one thing I realized, is this is not just about my son. This is about, like you said, blazing that path. And if we don't continue that tradition, if we don't follow what you've done, it can easily get eroded away. I mean, this bill, the individuals, or the law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is 40 years old, more than that. So it's slow going, and I think it can be difficult, but we have to step up for sure.
Right. And so we have a question here from Sharon. So let me bring it up. Okay. She says, if your school district is not at all inclusive and nearly all children with more significant disabilities are segregated, and you had an opportunity to sit down with your Board of Education, how would you frame the discussion, and what key points would you highlight for change? Are there one-page resources you would include? Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely have a one-page resource. And so Sharon, I know, has had difficulty. I've talked to her before, but maybe having a really great resource that I saw was on understood.org. They have the Andrew F. toolkit on there. That's something that you could create a one-page around, or even just print off theirs to take with talking points. But I think it's important that they know that you understand the law, and you can do this in a very polite and respectful way, but also making sure that you're with other families that also support inclusion. Don't go alone. Make sure they come with you and they share their stories too. And also coming up with some solutions for them. If we can't be 100% inclusive tomorrow, what are small things that your school board can do today that could move towards that movement? Whether it be looking at students' schedules, and that's one easy way. What are all the other students doing in that day, and how can we make the kids with disabilities and IEPs have similar schedules? Looking at a vision statement for your school board and what they want for all students and inclusivity, and having self-advocates talk and talking about their experiences, either in other inclusive school districts or in this school district and what their experience has been. So, Charmaine, I'm sure you have a ton of stuff that you could share too.
Well, and I think all of those things that you said are so important because it shows the variety of things that we need to share. I guess in the past few years, I look at it as how can we become marketers of inclusion, which sounds a little strange, but it's like, I know Michael Remus, who used to be the special ed director in Deer Valley in Arizona. I've heard him speak, and he talks about how we need to frame our message differently according to the group of people we're talking about. So to think about, if you're talking, to school board members, what are they most concerned about? Sometimes it's budget and what the bottom line is, or it's compliance. Is our school district in compliance? So, sometimes you can frame your talking points around those issues, that inclusion does not cost more, that it benefits all students, that we do need to be compliant with what IDEA says as far as least restrictive environment. When you talk to building principals, sometimes they're concerned about budget again, but they might be worried about professional development for teachers and how are we going to provide that. And so I think it's important that we kind of, individualize our talking points depending on the group that we're collaborating with at the time.
Right. And the one pager that I shared kind of does that. It's the same topic, but I changed it for the school board. Here's some money that you can look into. You should, reach out and look for this money. And I talked to them about that, versus my state rep, who may have a much broader sense of what I'm trying to get at. And so I'm trying to keep it a little bit broader. But Sharon, I can also, like Charmaine was saying, the piece about inclusion is not more expensive. I shared with my school board some research on that. So I could share that with you personally. But yeah, I think any of those, the 7 research studies that I have on my website, you can just search for 7 research studies for inclusion. Bringing those in can be effective. But I think that at the end of the day, that personal story and like what Charmaine's saying, finding out what their point of view is, you can go on your school district's website. And oftentimes they'll have a description of each school board member. And I found that there was one advocate on our school board that's very much about children with disabilities. So I reached out to her, and she's been a huge advocate for myself and my son and helping us kind of have another voice.
Right. And I think the other point, and Courtney and I were talking about this before we came on live, but is to widen our circle of allies, that we need to look at bringing community members that support inclusive environments, not only in the schools, but in the community, parents of typical kids. So we're not seen as this special interest group. Right. But that this is an education concern for the whole district. And that's where, some of the research articles about how other students benefit when there's inclusive education. So as many times as we can look for allies, like Courtney had mentioned, and form a larger group, have a larger voice, and we can make change a little bit faster.
True. You have to get that buy-in for sure.
Yes. So I was also going to, so Sharon had a question that her audio kicked out. So yeah, I have some resources from Michael Remus that I can put in here. And I think it's really helpful. He's moved on from Deer Valley, and I can't remember what district he's in right now. But Karen said that she just retired from working for a regional center in California, and she's learned so much about helping families with IEPs. I'm trying to continue my knowledge so I can help families with IEPs now. So that's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And then Lissa had a comment. She said, when you prepare information to share with a Board of Ed and have a plan of what you want to see, you have opportunity to help design what you want things to look like for your student. Exactly.
And for many more students. I mean,
yes.
You're active a lot more than just them. And I think that's the whole idea of taking advocacy to the next level, because we have to advocate for our children constantly at the IEP table. And so this is kind of taking it to a whole new level. And how can you affect change for other people?
Right. And that's where I think when we, can share our stories and our information and impact, kind of, sometimes we have to both try to influence the minds and the hearts of people. And so those personal stories can make such a difference. And it helps if you can figure out what kind of a learner that person is, because I say just as kids have different learning styles, so do teachers, administrators, school board. So a lot of times we send people articles, and if they're more of a linguistic kind of learner, that is helpful. But for some people want podcasts that they can just listen to in the car on their way to work. And so Shelley Moore's podcast, Julie Costin's podcast, I have a podcast on SoundCloud. All of that is another way that you can give resources, or videos, people that want to see it in action. So think about having a variety of ways to help educate people about the topic of, inclusion, not just for preschool, but, district-wide.
Yeah, using that UDL, right? Universal Design for Learning. It's funny you said that too, because I send my principal and the teachers that are involved with Troy and Hunter's education stuff all the time. And the principal wrote back and said, I love podcasts. So then I started inundating his email with Julie Costin, and that's why I asked you about your podcast, Charmaine, because I want to send it to him as well.
Yeah, so that helps, because so many of us have really busy lives, right? And so, having that audio can really help. So here is Sharon again, and she said, fantastic. Thank you, Courtney Hansen. But you also mentioned 7 ways, and then her feed was choppy. So if you could post that, that would be helpful.
Sure. That is the 7 research studies that you can help to fight for inclusion. I have it on my blog post on my website, www.inclusionevolution.com, but also Think Inclusion also posted it too. So you can go on there as well. And I learned that through the Maryland, I'm going to get it wrong, Maryland Coalition of Inclusivity. The lawyer there made a presentation and kind of shared some, and then I found some more recent research studies, but it talks about what Charmaine was saying about how, there's benefits for both typical kids and kids with disabilities, and it talks about academic benefits of inclusion. Those research studies are very powerful for the mind part of selling inclusion, like we were talking about, and then sharing your story for the heart piece too.
Right. And Angela says that she thinks Michael Remus is in Prescott, Arizona now. So he's pretty instrumental as far as making district-wide change around inclusive education. And one of the things that he talked about, which I thought was so interesting, was to look at the strengths and the talents of your staff, and to make sure that they're in places where they can do the most. And so, he would do, surveys and questionnaires about, exactly what their background and what their degrees were, what additional training they've had, what's their passion that they would like to work on. And so a lot of times I think with inclusion, it's using our staff in another way. Instead of a resource room teacher staying in the resource room all day working with kids, that person goes out to the general ed classrooms. I know the elementary school that my kids went to, they had a special grant from the state, and that's what they did, is they cross-trained staff, and they assigned staff people, like instead of just doing gifted and talented, that person was assigned a grade level, and they provided support to kids for anything that they needed. And the speech person was assigned another grade level. So that was one way that elementary school looked at how can we use our staff in another way and not get stuck in this box that if you have this certification, this is what you have to do. So that was pretty cool to see that happen,
Yeah.
And I was going to see if we had any other questions here. Okay, so Karen says that she taught in preschools for over 20 years and could see many children that should have had some sort of specialized assistance. I had some experience working with children with special needs, specific autism, but not all staff have that experience. This can make it difficult for child and staff. Specialized training for all staff is definitely needed.
Yeah, I agree. And part of advocating individually for your child, and then even systematically, is having that collaboration piece within the IEP. And when you're building these preschool programs, ensuring that there is a teacher in there. In Ohio, we had an intervention specialist. She was a special ed teacher, but had an intervention specialist degree. So she could work with typically developing students and ensuring that they're getting their needs met, and if they needed any intervention, they could, but she also had that special education piece. So I totally agree that there has to always be that support and training written into the IEP, and even at a school board level, making sure that if you're creating these programs that they're being supported, for sure.
Right. And that's the thing, I think, we get so used to the supplemental supports and aids section of the IEP talking about services for the child, but you can write in services and support for the staff. And it's just important that you be specific because, sometimes I've seen where they have a half-hour staff meeting and talk about special education, and they consider that their training for the staff. So as much as you can be more specific in the IEP, what the training will look like, it really is important that teachers see other teachers doing this so they have that modeling, and then have peer coaching. Because what we've learned from staff development is if you don't have the modeling and the coaching, like 0% of the information you learned at that conference will get implemented in the classroom. So, but yeah, for sure you can write training in. And I think it's important to tell teachers, I don't want teachers to feel defensive, like, oh, you're saying I don't know how to do my job. It's like, no, it's like we're all still learning, and it's okay. It's not a matter of shame to say, I would love additional training.
Right. And that's part of professional development. And often I know, just I was a general education teacher, we did not get a lot of that training in our college program. So having that program or that professional development at the school level is very important.
Yeah, and luckily more colleges are starting to do some kind of dual certification. So when teachers graduate, and that's how mine was back in Pennsylvania, that I had an elementary degree plus a special ed degree. And the co-teaching model, if you look up Paula Kluth and Julie Costin, that makes a tremendous difference as far as teachers feeling comfortable, in supporting all students in their class. So, that training can really make a big difference. So here's a comment from Lissa. She lives in Idaho now, but she had lived in Washington. And she said, and I don't know, do you know how to say that county name, Courtney?
Oh, no, I've seen it though. I've seen signs for it. I don't want to say it because there's even a city near me called Puyallup, and the spelling of it is completely different. So I do not want to attempt that.
So she was saying where her son started preschool at Good Beginnings, it actually wasn't all inclusive either. They had an offsite preschool, but did have options for open enrollment for preschoolers who didn't have a disability. So it was an option for those parents of preschoolers to enroll their children. So that would be good as far as maybe we can talk about the different models here. And also, Angela, let me bring up hers. Angela says, what is the exact law that you were referring to that preschool has to be inclusive? So let's maybe talk about that too.
So federal and state law never uses the word inclusive. But what it does say under the continuum of placement and least restrictive environment is that students have to be in general education to the maximum extent possible, and that those students should be receiving supports in that class and making individual progress on their IEP goals. And those supports have to be exhausted before you move down the continuum of placement. And basically what that means is that general education comes first. That's the first placement, and that's with typical peers. And I know Washington State specifically says has preschool included in that, including preschoolers. So preschool all the way up to graduation has that idea of least restrictive environment with typical peers. And you move along. Once those supports have been exhausted, if the student is not making individual progress, then they can move to a more restrictive setting. So for example, in Ohio, there was 4 inclusive, and when I say inclusive, it was 50-50, which we know is not true inclusion, but it was 50-50, 50 kids with IEPs, 50 without IEPs, typically developing. And they did have one self-contained preschool class, but all the kids started in that quote unquote inclusive setting. And then if they needed to be put into the more restrictive setting, they could. And that's how it should truly work. And that's not what I'm seeing in Washington. And I noticed the commenter said something that there's open enrollment, but my fear is that most parents with preschoolers don't know that that's an option. I mean, I think, Charmaine, you were very unique in knowing my son could go to a private preschool. We could put him there, and the school should pay for that. And you're right, but I don't know that a lot of parents understand or know that.
Yeah, so that's the thing, I think, and that's why these kinds of live shows are important, because now, what Courtney has done in Washington and is doing, and the handout that you can get is going to help spread that word so people can share the video, so other parents know about it. Share it with preschool teachers and staff that because sometimes even the staff doesn't quite understand exactly the whole idea of a continuum of services and how we're supposed to presume inclusion first, right? So that kind of information is really helpful.
Yes, definitely.
And as far as different models, I know, Lissa, you were saying, and Courtney just mentioned this too, as far as the open enrollment. Right. So there are, I think probably, I don't know for sure, but my guess is most preschool programs are sometimes off-site. They're not tied to an elementary building campus. Sometimes there's cooperatives with Head Start programs, because Head Start usually has some really good diversity, and that's an excellent way to use the skills. And Head Start staff have ongoing training. So looking into a Head Start program, if you have a young child, that can be something. There's, a variety of just typical, kids are us kind of preschool opportunities,
Sorry, Charmaine. What I found in my area is that there's just very few options for private preschool. We have one that's held in the gymnastics studio, and none of the teachers have any certification. And then the other option in our small town is on base. But if you don't have access to base, you can't be in that school. So I have my typical daughter in the private preschool on base. But if you don't have that option, you are really left with the gymnastics studio where the teachers have no certification. Right. So having that preschool inclusion isn't going to just help those kids with disabilities, but also preparing typical students to be around kids with disabilities, and also being with a teacher that has a certification and learning those things they need to learn for kindergarten.
And so then, yeah, I mean, that's like a perfect thing that you could rally other parents around as far as if there aren't many options. And so, while we're looking at preschool options for our kids with disabilities, then to say to other moms we know and other mom groups that we're involved in, how can we talk about this is an area of need in our community and what can we do about this? So yeah, that would be awesome. But you're right. I mean, and especially people that live in rural communities, there's, it's not like there's a lot of options out there. So it's how do we create that? And usually the school district will have to have something, right?
Yeah.
Because they have students that they've identified.
Right.
And I think some school districts have found that having students without disabilities pay a slight tuition fee will help with the cost of running the program. So, and if you can find out about nearby communities that have options and maybe visit there or have those childcare people come over to your district and just share, and do some networking that way too.
Yeah, for sure. There's a really good program up at Shoreline that I'm gonna hopefully go and observe. So there are places in Washington doing it, but it's, 24% of kids being in a class with typical, that's just atrocious to me. So something needs to change. So hopefully they can look to places like Virginia and Ohio that have passed guidance. And that, I know in Ohio in particular, they're doing this, and there's not universal preschool there. So they're making it happen, even though the law says they don't have a preschool. They're just following that continuum of placement and the idea of least restrictive environment.
Right. And Christy brings up another good point. She said the parents being teachers, well, she said, even as parents being teachers of 2 autistic sons, we had to fight for all the services we acquired for our sons. So knowledge is power. Yes. Yes.
That's right. Thanks,
yeah. So that's why I think it's really important that, we share resources with families, because that's where you're going to feel more confident when you're talking to administrators or school board members or even your state representatives about the change that needs to happen. So the more knowledge that we can help share. So I encourage people to go to Courtney's website, and let me pull that up again here, the URL for that. So Inclusion Evolution. I love it. So
it has been an evolution, for sure.
What's that?
It has been an evolution, that's for sure. It's still evolving.
I know. So hopefully, as younger parents like Courtney come up, it's like this is going to be something that's going to be continued. And I appreciate all the parents that have been with us live today, or if you're watching the replay. If you are interested in getting Courtney's handout about preschool and helping advocate for inclusive preschool, just type the word preschool in the comments and you can get the download for that PDF. And Courtney and I can come back, and there's some other resources that we mentioned, and we'll make sure that we either give you the site where you can find that or a URL to the PDF. So I thank you, Courtney, for being with us today and sharing all your experiences.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for being a mentor to me, Charmaine. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone that's paved the path for me.
Well, we're ready to hand the torch off. So
I know that I'm ready. I am. I'm ready.
You are. So next Thursday, I'm going to be doing a live show about prior written notice. So for parents, a lot of times it's kind of one of those confusing things. Why do they call it prior written notice when it seems like it's written up before or afterwards? So you'll be learning about what needs to be in a prior written notice, the different components there, how to make sure the language is specific in it, and then why it is so important to have a well-written prior written notice Usually that gets crafted at the end of your IEP meeting, but we'll be talking all about prior written notice next week. So I hope people can come back. We are here every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. And until next Thursday, everybody take care, and we shall see you later. Bye, Courtney.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.